She becomes my queen consort.
What began as a silent power shift inside the palace
Charles said he hoped his experience may give encouragement to others.
quickly erupted into a moment that sent shockwaves through the monarchy and beyond.
And I felt, you're losing people every single time you have those headlines. We all get that there's a really big urgent message.
Prince William didn't wait for ceremony or permission. He moved fast, took control, and within hours forced Queen Camilla's children out of the palace walls entirely. This wasn't tradition bending. This was authority snapping into place. But what the public later dismissed as a tense Christmas misunderstanding was only the surface. The so-called lunch banishment was merely the first strike in a calculated campaign that exposed rot deep inside the crown itself. The real story wasn't about family tension. It was about money, access, and a system quietly exploited for years. So what exactly did William uncover that demanded action this brutal and immediate? And how far would Camilla go to shield the structure she had built behind closed doors? The answers didn't emerge in press statements or palace leaks. They unfolded in a dining room where silence became a verdict. Christmas lunch at Sandringham should have been harmless and predictable. Roasted turkey on polished plates, pudding waiting in the wings, and polite conversation floating across the long table. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes laughed freely, chatting about estate renovations and private wine cellars, speaking as if royal access was theirs by default. They joked like insiders because they believed they were untouchable. Meanwhile, William sat motionless at the head of the table, his posture calm, but his attention razor-sharp. His eyes followed every glance, every assumption, every casual claim to privilege that no longer sat right. King Charles looked drained, shoulders heavy, the weight of recent months etched across his face. Camilla's practiced smile flickered. Not long enough to draw comment, but long enough to be noticed. The room carried a tension no one dared to name. When the main course was cleared, William lowered his water glass with a crisp, deliberate clink. It wasn't loud, but it landed like a signal. The sound cut through the hum of conversation, and instinctively, everyone felt it. Seconds later, the dining room doors opened, and not for dessert. Security personnel entered with controlled precision. Faces blank, movements exact, purpose unmistakable. Conversations died instantly. Forks froze mid-air. The room locked into stunned silence as William rose slowly from his chair. He placed a blue folder on the table, its soft thud louder than any raised voice. Inside were documents no one at that table could dismiss or deflect. Forensic audit reports, detailed bank statements, shell company registrations, itemized invoices mapping the movement of millions quietly siphoned from royal accounts over years. Tom and Laura's faces drained as if the blood had been pulled straight out of them. Tom sputtered, calling it an insult, his voice cracking as he turned toward Camilla. Not in outrage, but in desperation. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her hands clenched the napkin so tightly her knuckles blanched white. King Charles stared down at the pages, his expression hollowing as the numbers spoke louder than any accusation. There was no ambiguity, no grey area. Every figure lined up. William spoke evenly, his voice calm, almost restrained, but each word landed like a controlled blow. All contracts between the Crown and the front companies were terminated effective immediately. State auditors would reclaim misappropriated funds, access to royal properties revoked, financial privileges erased on the spot. There was no room for argument, no pause for negotiation. Security stepped forward and escorted Tom and Laura away from the table without ceremony. They weren't granted the dignity of the main halls. Instead, they were led through service corridors, past doors meant for deliveries and staff, out of sight, out of status. Their protests echoed briefly, then disappeared into the walls. William watched from the window, expression unreadable. He understood how severe it looked, and he didn't soften it. Severity was the message. The era of exploiting royal privilege had ended in full view of the institution itself. The rules had shifted, and immunity no longer existed. Still, one question burned beneath the silence. How could a Prince of Wales, not yet king, move against the Queen's children? and seemingly against his father's wishes. The answer had already been signed into existence 2 days before Christmas.
Prince William will go above and beyond to control the monarchy's image by stripping non-royal or non-working royals of their titles.
William quietly executed a legal transfer of authority. Emergency powers over crown finances and internal oversight were placed squarely in his hands. The move was clean, lawful, and engineered long before anyone noticed. Nothing about it was impulsive. It was deliberate, calculated, and executed with surgical precision. Inside the family, shock rippled outward. Camilla and Charles struggled to absorb the speed of what had unfolded. Staff whispered in corridors, careful not to be overheard. Tom and Laura sat in a standard security vehicle, stripped of special handling, removed from the household like ordinary offenders. No privilege, no insulation, no safety net. William understood how it would be perceived. Some would call it ruthless, others cruel, but any hint that public duty could be twisted for private gain had been shut down decisively. The palace hadn't just seen discipline, it had witnessed authority reasserted in the most visible way possible. And this was only the beginning. 48 hours before the expulsion, a meeting occurred that would never appear in any court circular. Inside a secure chamber at St. James's Palace, far beyond Camilla's reach, William sat across from the Lord Chief Justice and the Home Secretary. The thick Tudor-era walls blocked all electronic intrusion. The atmosphere was heavy, tense, more like a tribunal than a transition. The public narrative later spoke of cooperation, continuity, and temporary measures due to the king's health. But behind those doors, the truth was far more aggressive. William wasn't maintaining the system. He was dismantling a threat inside it. The Regency Act was activated, but his interpretation stretched beyond precedent. These documents weren't symbolic gestures. They unlocked security authority, financial oversight, and personnel control normally reserved for the monarch alone. When Charles signed at 9:47 p.m., shaky but deliberate, the transfer became binding. By 10:15 p.m., William was already moving. His first calls summoned the Director General of MI5 and the Keeper of the Privy Purse to an emergency midnight meeting at Clarence House. Their positions were suddenly unstable. William informed them their offices had been compromised by loyalty channels tied to the Queen's household. No personal accusations, just facts. Cooperation was non-negotiable. The Keeper cited protocol. William's reply was cold. Those same protocols had allowed millions to vanish unnoticed, and that would no longer be tolerated. By 2 a.m., both roles had new occupants. William had spent months quietly vetting replacements from outside the palace ecosystem: financial forensics specialists, counterintelligence professionals, people loyal to integrity, not influence. Then came the black box, a secure digital archive holding decades of financial records, classified correspondence, security files, and personnel data. Designed only for the monarch and spouse, it had become a blind spot that allowed abuse to grow unchecked. At 3:30 a.m., William ran his first query. All contracts and payments tied to the Parker Bowles family. The results were worse than feared. Over 5 years, royal funds had been rerouted through routine budget lines: logistics, estate maintenance, receptions, and charitable events. Each entry looked harmless alone. Together, they revealed a deliberate pattern: small transfers stacked beside larger ones, engineered to pass surface audits while quietly amassing massive totals in hidden accounts. At the centre stood Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, not passive recipients, but controllers. They operated offshore trusts in the Isle of Man, Jersey, and the British Virgin Islands, linked to shell companies holding palace contracts. Every invoice was intentional, every signature calculated. Premium food supplies billed at triple market value, wine marked up to thousands per bottle, floral arrangements inflated beyond reason, media consulting invoices charging tens of thousands for single emails, crisis consultations billed when no crisis existed. The most disturbing category was special event coordination. Cross-checks revealed events that never happened, or were dramatically smaller than billed. Over 5 years, Approximately £45 million had been siphoned through this network. Every transaction passed through the Queen's office before final approval. William now knew what was taken and how. What remained unanswered was whether Camilla had simply failed to intervene or had orchestrated the entire scheme. That answer rested on one final detail: a distinctive purple seal appearing on documents at the exact moments when the aging king was most vulnerable. If that seal confirmed intent, the fate of the Queen's children and the balance of power itself would be sealed. In William's secure basement operation, forensic accountants worked without pause. Drawn from the Serious Fraud Office and former MI6 financial intelligence units, they followed the money with relentless focus. No phones, no internet, no outside contact, just numbers, records, and truth. Then one analyst saw it. Special fund withdrawals dating back generations, governed by a dual signature rule requiring approval from both the monarch and the keeper of the privy purse. Over 5 years, 237 transactions appeared, totaling £87 million. Every signature, every mark on the page became a weapon in this silent war. William's team ran King Charles's signatures through high-end analysis software, comparing each against verified exemplars from every period of his reign. A healthy royal signature would score 95 to 98% for consistency, precision, and letter formation, but the results were shocking beyond comprehension. The largest authorizations, ranging from £500,000 to £3 million, scored a mere 45 to 70%. These weren't just sloppy signatures. They were trembling, uneven, signs of a hand under duress, compromised by extreme fatigue, or medication suppressing cognitive function. Cross-referencing them with the King's medical schedule made the situation horrifyingly clear. Every massive fraudulent transaction coincided with chemotherapy sessions or post-operative recovery periods, moments when anti-nausea drugs and painkillers dulled cognition and decision-making. Someone had exploited the King's vulnerability with cold precision. William sat in what analysts later described as cold fury as the timeline unfolded on screen. Signatures were juxtaposed with medical records, showing a chilling pattern of exploitation. But the plot was even more devious. The sandwiching technique. High-value requests were buried among mundane paperwork, ceremonial proclamations, diplomatic letters, military commissions, charitable approvals. The king would barely notice the dangerous documents hidden between these routine papers. Staff loyal to Camilla's office pressed urgency. "We really must sign these today, sir, perhaps quickly so you can rest." And the king, trusting, fatigued, signed blindly, giving seconds per page. Trust had been weaponized for profit. The final, undeniable proof came from the infamous purple seal. Special fund requests were first routed through Camilla's office, where her personal seal marked the documents for review. Only then were they passed to Charles. Beneath the king's trembling signature, the purple seal confirmed deliberate authorization. Someone had knowingly approved these fraudulent extractions. The implications were brutal. This was not embezzlement alone. It was elder abuse. The king's illness had been weaponized. Millions siphoned from the crown were the product of careful orchestration by someone sworn to be his closest ally. William now had digital evidence exposing a sophisticated, systematic scheme, but digital copies alone weren't enough for criminal proof. He needed the originals, physical documents with Charles's signature, Camilla's purple seal, and internal correspondence showing conscious approval. Palace archives were vast, labyrinthine, and dangerous to navigate. If Camilla suspected William's team was closing in, she could destroy evidence instantly. A fire in a records room, a plumbing disaster, or a misplaced file. William couldn't rush. He devised a trap. Deliberate, calculated, and psychologically lethal. Through loyal channels, information about the forensic investigation was leaked just enough to reach Camilla. She would believe she was under pressure, panicking as intended. Her instincts would compel her to act. And when she did, William would catch her in the act. Margaret Thornton, an administrative assistant in the Privy Purse Office, became the perfect pawn. Personally recommended by Camilla, loyal but naive, she genuinely believed Camilla was unfairly vilified. That loyalty made her predictable. William's team arranged for her to overhear a staged conversation between auditors. The money trail had been traced. The originals were the last missing piece. Margaret heard everything, exactly as planned. Within 6 hours, Camilla realised the trap had been set. Margaret's warning reached her through her remaining network while she was taking tea at Clarence House. Calm and calculating, Camilla knew the digital evidence alone was strong but arguable. Physical documents bearing the king's vulnerable signature and her purple seal would make her position irreparably collapse. She acted with cold efficiency. Retrieving a disposable phone used for sensitive communications, she called Ali Hassan, her chief close protection officer of 15 years. Ali wasn't just a bodyguard. He had shielded her through every scandal, checked cars for explosives, and kept secrets no one else could touch. Loyalty like his went beyond duty, but could it extend to committing a crime? Camilla laid out the instructions. Safe number 4 in Archive B contained the original authorizations. They had to vanish, without triggering alarms. Ali understood immediately. This wasn't standard security work. This was the destruction of evidence, potentially obstruction of justice. At 1:45 a.m., Ali entered Buckingham Palace through a staff entrance, dressed in standard night security attire that allowed him to blend into shadows. His credentials granted access to most non-public areas. He carried a flashlight disguised as a laser cutter and an incendiary device for ultimate destruction. Ali navigated the corridors expertly, avoiding patrols and cameras. The oldest, most maze-like wing of the palace led him to the archive room. At 2:03 a.m., he reached the door. Keypad locked, but his clearance opened it. The room was dimly lit, rows of cabinets stretching into shadows. Safe number 4 stood at the far wall. He activated the laser cutter, melting the internal mechanism slowly and silently. 15 minutes later, the lock surrendered. Inside lay a red portfolio, 40 pages of original special fund authorizations, Charles's signatures paired with Camilla's purple seals. Each page documented hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, of pounds fraudulently siphoned. Ali raised the lighter to ignite the documents, but suddenly, floodlights blazed. Blinded, he dropped the lighter. Footsteps approached rapidly. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson's voice cut through sharply. "Stay hands on your head!" Ali was surrounded by 5 armed Royal Protection Group officers. Outnumbered, outgunned, Ali had no choice. His hands rose instinctively. His pistol was removed, zip-tied behind his back. The red portfolio was carefully retrieved. Thompson announced the charges: attempted destruction of Crown property, unauthorized access, conspiracy to obstruct a royal investigation. Ali said nothing. He relied on years of training. But Thompson dropped the final blow. Ali's burner phone had been monitored by GCHQ for 3 days. Every word Camilla spoke, every order given to destroy evidence, was recorded. Camilla had effectively self-incriminated. Ali's capture ended one conspiracy, but a larger question eclipsed all else. Why would a queen risk felony, loyalty, and decades of protection to destroy evidence? Ali's interrogation revealed more than planned. He sat in a room that officially didn't exist. Austere, metal table, 3 chairs, soundproof walls, cameras in corners, legal status ambiguous. Emergency provisions under the Official Secrets Act allowed bypassing normal channels. No lawyers. Only Prince William and Lord Justice Pemberton, senior legal advisor. William insisted on leading the interrogation personally. He didn't just want to know what Ali had done, he needed to understand why a decorated protection officer would risk everything for Camilla. The session opened with a recording, Camilla's voice, crystal clear, ordering Ali to destroy the documents in Archive B, safe number 4. Ali remained calm, jaw tightening, breathing controlled. Camilla hadn't instructed relocation, safety planning, or preservation, only destruction. Her sole aim: eliminate the evidence. William slid documents across the table, outlining consequences. Ali faced 20 years minimum for trespassing restricted areas, attempted destruction of national property, endangerment of a heritage site, conspiracy to obstruct a royal investigation, and possible terrorism-related charges. Armed presence and family jeopardy amplified the stakes. One document offered salvation: Full cooperation could provide witness protection, sentence reduction, family security, and continued status. Ali would testify on the conspiracy, financial schemes, and Camilla's role. 6 tense hours passed. Ali admitted loyalty had been weaponized. He realized Camilla hadn't asked him to protect anyone in danger. She asked him to commit felony to cover systematic theft. Exploitation of a dying king's trust had been orchestrated. That distinction changed everything. Ali's testimony revealed the full scope. Camilla's operation wasn't opportunistic. It was a calculated strategy. She had created the so-called post-Charles Safety Fund, designed to secure at least £100 million in independent assets. Her children acted as fronts, funneling royal contracts through shell companies, laundering money into trusts under their control. Ali Hassan recounted, with painstaking clarity, how Camilla had methodically maneuvered Charles into authorizing these illicit transactions. She had gained access to his medical schedule under the pretense of arranging her own appointments, then strategically presented documents during the times when he was most pliable, following chemotherapy, while under anti-nausea medications, or in the throes of fatigue and recovery. In these vulnerable windows, his capacity for critical scrutiny was severely diminished. Documents ostensibly supporting charitable ventures or conservation projects were, in reality, mechanisms to funnel millions into her children's shell companies. Ali emphasized that Camilla never displayed genuine remorse. The only stress she exhibited was fear of discovery, not concern for the king. She had treated the exploitation of Charles's illness as a deliberate business maneuver, relishing the efficiency and secrecy with which she orchestrated every step. William's entire body tensed as he absorbed the full scope of Ali's testimony. He had long suspected financial misconduct, yet the revelation of the premeditated, long-term exploitation of his father's vulnerability cut deeper than anything he had imagined. Camilla had weaponized trust, affection, and illness itself to enrich herself and her children. The man who had defended her for decades, who had elevated her status and shielded her from public opinion, had been systematically betrayed in the most intimate of ways. With Ali's testimony, the conspiracy was complete, every element exposed. From the destruction of critical documents to financial manipulation, from falsified approvals to strategic exploitation of Charles's medical vulnerabilities. And yet, the most formidable challenge remained. William now faced the unbearable task of confronting his father with the truth. He had to show him that the woman who had cared for him, who had sat beside him during his most vulnerable moments, was the architect of this deception. William's briefcase, heavy with evidence, seemed to grow heavier with each step as he approached the private residence. The documents, recordings, and meticulously compiled timeline of betrayal carried the weight of both revelation and responsibility. The conspiracy had been unraveled, but the question that haunted him remained. How could he tell a dying king that the woman he had trusted and loved was also the greatest threat to him? And what would such a revelation do to the remnants of his world, already fragile with age and illness? The morning was grey and oppressive, the low-hanging clouds a sombre mirror of the storm about to erupt inside the estate. William drove with deliberate purpose, ignoring protocol. This could not be a formal visitation. This was a father-son reckoning, a confrontation about a betrayal so profound it threatened the very fabric of the monarchy and their family. He arrived precisely at 9, carrying only a leather briefcase. The weight of its contents, papers, recordings, charts, and financial audits, far exceeded its physical mass. Charles sat in his private study, surrounded by the memorabilia of a lifetime of service, photographs of state occasions, ceremonial medals, tokens of charitable initiatives, and mementos of personal triumphs. The cancer had left him visibly aged. His once sturdy frame was now fragile, his skin delicate and translucent, the quiet dignity he carried now seeming almost brittle. Camilla was seated nearby, a book held delicately in her lap, projecting the calm composure of the devoted wife. Yet when she noticed William, she froze, her carefully maintained poise faltering. She immediately understood that this conversation was no longer one she could manipulate or control. William's expression was hard, resolute. He was no longer the son who could be guilted into silence or appeasement. William set the briefcase on the table and began removing the documents in deliberate order. First came the financial audits, charts and graphs, mapping the flow of money from royal accounts through intricate shell companies to the Parker Bowles family trusts. Next, he presented the original special fund authorizations, each bearing Charles's signature alongside Camilla's unmistakable purple seal. He outlined the scale of the deception. Over 5 years, £87 million had disappeared from royal accounts through ghost invoices and fraudulent contracts. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes were the ultimate beneficiaries, hiding ownership through layers of complex corporate structures designed to obscure accountability. William handed Charles one of the forms, a £2.8 million emergency conservation payment, which had ultimately been funneled into a Jersey shell company before being laundered into a family trust. Charles's hands trembled as he held the documents. Struggling to remember signing them, he tried to reconcile the act with the man he believed himself to be. William continued, carefully pairing each authorization with medical records, demonstrating that his father had signed during periods of heavy sedation, under pain management, or while cognitively compromised. 43 high-value authorizations, all signed when he was most vulnerable, revealed a calculated exploitation of trust. Could a son even articulate betrayal to a father? William then pointed to the purple seal, Camilla's personal insignia. This was no clerical mistake. It was deliberate facilitation. Every fraudulent authorization bore her explicit approval. Charles's eyes widened as the realization struck him. The woman he had defended against public scrutiny, whom he had elevated above all others, had used him to enrich her children. The final piece of evidence was a recording from Ali Hassan, Camilla's longtime bodyguard. In chilling detail, Ali explained how she had obtained Charles's medical schedule, timed document signing sessions, and manipulated the presentation of requests to exploit the king's trust and philanthropic instincts. She had referred to this operation as her accumulation strategy, the Post-Charles Safety Fund, designed to secure at least £100 million in independent assets. Charles listened, his face pale, his body trembling. The question that had haunted decades of his life rose unbidden. Why had he given her everything? Love, trust, protection, and status, only to have it turned against him. Tears streamed down his face, not in anger, but in utter devastation. His final years, it seemed, had been lived under a meticulously crafted lie. Camilla attempted to speak, but her words collapsed under the weight of evidence and testimony. Her tears, though present, were not for the harm caused. They were for the fear of losing wealth, status, and control. William observed her with a mixture of pity and judgment. Her world, carefully constructed over decades, was unraveling in real time. She tried shifting blame onto William, claiming that his resentment over Diana's memory had compelled her to act in self-protection. But William's response was unwavering. Her fear of losing money had cost her the only thing that truly mattered, the trust of Charles. Charles withdrew inward, processing the enormity of the deception. How many times had he been presented with documents under the guise of care? How often had he trusted her, believing she acted in his best interests, only to discover manipulation and greed? Every memory of love, every gesture of partnership now felt tainted, a part of a performance designed to deceive. William softened slightly and asked his father a question heavy with consequence. Did he wish for justice to proceed, or should the matter be halted to avoid public scandal? Charles's nod, subtle yet absolute, was permission, a burden no father should have to place upon his child, the authority to dismantle the remnants of a life built on deceit. The evidence was complete. Every ledger, every document, every recorded conversation had been meticulously gathered. The conspiracy, as intricate as it was devastating, had been fully exposed. And yet, the ultimate question lingered, heavy and unyielding in William's mind. What does justice look like when the criminal is a queen and the victim is a dying king? How could a system built to protect royalty reconcile such betrayal? Could the monarchy survive the shockwaves, and could trust ever be fully restored within a family so deeply scarred? Judgment Day had arrived. William stood in the grand yet austere room facing Camilla, fully aware that this would be the last time they shared the same space. His posture was steady, his expression composed, but his eyes carried the weight of responsibility, grief, and authority. There would be no mercy here, no room for negotiation framed as compassion. Camilla was being removed not out of malice, but because the institution itself could not withstand the scandal of a queen consort being publicly tried for such egregious crimes. He reached into his leather briefcase and withdrew a sealed legal order, countersigned by the Lord Chief Justice and authenticated by the Prince Regent. The terms were absolute, uncompromising. Camilla would leave the estate within 15 minutes. She would relocate to a remote property in the Scottish Highlands, far from public scrutiny, far from the halls she had manipulated for so long. Her access to public funds would be strictly limited, reduced to a monitored stipend. Every pound, every transaction would be accountable. In title alone, she would retain the designation of Queen Consort, but she would be stripped of every privilege associated with her role. No public appearances, no ceremonial duties, no engagement in royal events. Most importantly, she would have no contact with Charles. Not a visit, not a letter, not a phone call. All communication would be routed through legal channels. Even contact with her children would be restricted and supervised, contingent on full cooperation with restitution procedures. William's voice was firm, calm and commanding. The children, spared criminal charges, owed their reprieve entirely to their compliance. Camilla attempted to argue, citing her rights as queen consort, but William cut her off without hesitation. The alternative was stark and unavoidable: full criminal prosecution for fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse, prison, public trials, scandal broadcast worldwide. The stakes were irreversible. Recognition dawned immediately on her face. Resistance was futile. Charles, seated nearby, offered no intervention. His gaze was fixed on the muted grey morning outside, refusing to acknowledge her presence. Her acceptance, whispered, broken and defeated, filled the room like a fragile echo of her former power. 2 officers entered, composed and professional, and escorted her with unwavering precision to the waiting vehicle. She could bring only the clothes she wore. Everything else would be inventoried, sentimental items preserved, all else sold to compensate the stolen funds. Each step toward the Range Rover, each inch she traversed, was a step out of a life she had meticulously controlled, a life built on manipulation and secrecy, into an obscurity she had never anticipated. William's eyes followed the vehicle as it disappeared behind the ancient oak trees, leaving only the vast, silent estate behind. Turning back to Charles, William noticed the king remained seated, still staring out into the morning. His face was etched with grief, relief, and disbelief. William placed a gentle hand on his father's shoulder, a silent reminder that while betrayal had cut deep, protection and justice were now in place. Charles's slight nod, trembling yet resolute, indicated he understood the immediate threat had passed, but he could not yet fully process the enormity of what had occurred. William spoke softly, yet with unwavering certainty. The immediate danger was gone. The deceit had been uncovered. The guilty had been removed. The finances were now stabilized. Yet, he emphasized, the work was far from over. Public trust, once fractured, needed to be restored. Internal oversight had to be strengthened, protocols reinforced, and the monarchy reformed to prevent future exploitation. Charles listened, his fragile voice carrying the weight of years of experience and caution, reminding William that vigilance must never come at the expense of humanity. The monarchy's strength, he insisted, stemmed not from control or rigid rules, but from connection, warmth, and the ability to inspire trust. William absorbed this counsel, acknowledging that balancing reform and humanity would be his greatest challenge. At that moment, Kate entered quietly, taking her place beside him. Her presence was a subtle yet vital reminder that leadership was never a solitary endeavour. She reassured Charles that he would be cared for, that those around him valued him personally, and not merely for the crown he wore. Her calm, reassuring presence was a counterweight to the tension in the room, a signal that the family, though tested, could still provide security and support. Charles, emotionally raw, allowed a small measure of relief to touch his expression. For the first time in years, he realized that the family surrounding him was acting in his genuine interest rather than for appearances or political optics. Gratitude softened the edges of his anguish. He acknowledged William's courage and wisdom, recognizing the painful but necessary confrontation with truth that had just taken place. Discussion turned to the children. Tom and Laura, under strict supervision, would repay much of the stolen wealth and fade from public life. Their avoidance of prosecution hinged entirely on continued compliance. Any attempt to rehabilitate their public image, if not carefully managed, could trigger renewed legal consequences. The once tightly knit web of manipulation and secrecy within the family was now under scrutiny. Accountability absolute. Charles's exhaustion became increasingly apparent. William and Kate prepared to depart, pausing to remind him of their commitment, their love, and their unwavering support. William spoke candidly, emphasizing that exile, however harsh, was the only means to protect both the king and the institution he served. Charles, though grieving, recognized the truth in those words. A faint, sad smile crossed his face as they walked toward the car. William looked back, capturing the image of his father in the study window, a man reconciled to the cost of truth, yet burdened by grief. Relief mingled with sorrow, and a monumental sense of responsibility settled over him. Kate squeezed William's hand, silently sharing the weight of leadership and responsibility. The estate, steeped in history, disappeared behind them, leaving the past behind, but not the questions. Could the monarchy truly recover from betrayal at the very top? Could trust, both public and private, be restored after such a profound fracture? William did not answer immediately. He simply stared ahead, the road stretching before him both literally and metaphorically, knowing that the true test was only just beginning. The monarchy, its traditions, and its very credibility now rested on decisions that demanded wisdom, courage, and unwavering commitment. And as William drove forward, the weight of the crown's future pressing on his shoulders, one question remained stubbornly unresolved. When he becomes king, will Camilla remain in her isolated exile, or will the tides of power and time alter the balance once again? The answers would not come easily. The family, the institution, and the world would watch, waiting for the next move, the next decision, the next test of leadership and justice. Take a moment to share your thoughts in the comment section below. What would you do in William's place? How do you think the monarchy can survive and rebuild trust after such betrayal? And if you haven't already, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to stay updated on every twist, revelation, and unfolding drama. Also, don't forget to click the next video appearing on your screen. It's the continuation of this story, and you won't want to miss what happens next.